an invitation sealed with gold and blood. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Share your city. I love seeing them all. Wolfe attends the deadliest dinner in town. If you live in a house that runs on habits the way ours does, orchids at 9, beer at 11, Fritz's morale at a steady simmer, you notice the smallest leak in the schedule the way a banker notices a nickel missing. Thursday started like a good banker's dream, calm, solvent, and boring. Wolfe had just come down, returned his bulk to the leather throne that worries for its springs, and opened the Times as if it had petitioned for his attention and been grudgingly granted a hearing. He had worked through foreign news and was disapproving of a columnist's grammar, which is one of his indoor sports. I had my desk in order and my conscience clean, or as clean as it gets in this line. At 9:43 by our hall clock, the bell rang. It was a single, polite touch, the kind you get from a hand that has shaken too many donors. I went and found a man that matched the ring. Neat hair, cheap suit, good shoes. He carried a black envelope thick enough to have ideas. It had no stamp. There was a little metal charm on the flap, the kind you see pinned on women who believe jewelry should prove a point. A silver chess queen. "Mr. Goodwin?" he asked, and his voice tried on soprano but landed on tenor. "Congratulations," I said. "You got the name right in one. The other guy keeping a potted jungle in the kitchen is not me." "Who are you?" "I was told to hand this to Mr. Nero Wolfe," he said, like a choir boy at high mass who suspects the incense is cut rate. "In person." "That's romantic," I told him, "but you'll have to make do with me. The person you want does not receive hand deliveries. He receives only air of the room, and the oxygen graciously bends toward him." He hesitated. I can't blame him. I was trying to decide between two impulses, getting the envelope or getting a look at what the hesitation said about him. "I'm to return with an answer," he said. "And wait." The word wait has different flavors in our house. If it's about a roast, Fritz pronounces it like a religious rite. If it's about money, Wolfe extracts the sap from it like a maple tapper. If it's about people outside the brownstone, wait is mostly my business. "All right," I said. "You can wait. You'll want a chair, not that one. That chair is for friends, the ungodly and otherwise. Bring it in, and I'll see if Mr. Wolfe will interrupt his appointment with the English language." He followed me down the hall. Fritz, stationed in the doorway to the kitchen with a whisk like a scepter, viewed the newcomer with disappointment. Fritz has the kind of soul that is offended by cheap cologne because it is cheap. He withdrew, whisk and soul, without comment. I took the envelope across the rug, set it on Wolfe's desk blotter where papers go to, find their fate, and said, "A gentleman on the stoop, with a chess fetish. Hand delivery, no postage. Silver queen charm, and a request for your personal attention. He promises to wait." Wolfe had good will for words, but not for interruptions. He lowered the Times an inch and gave me one of those looks that owes its energy to gravity. If he is the postman, tell him we attend at our convenience. If he is an idiot, expel him. If he is neither, explain quickly. I gave the envelope a delicate operation with my letter opener. Inside was a card on heavy stock that made the penmanship feel like sin. The message was short, the way a knife is short. "Mr. Nero Wolfe, you are invited to attend upon me this evening at 8 o'clock at my house on East 70th Street, to witness an arrangement and preserve a record. Bring Mr. Goodwin only. This is my last invitation. Regina Quinton." There was a smaller card, an address, and a key with a little silk tassel in red. Also, a bank check. I looked at the numbers, because I am not allergic to arithmetic. It was $25,000, payable to Nero Wolfe, drawn on a bank that doesn't bounce, and dated that day. I read it aloud because Wolfe likes his offerings warmed. When I finished, I put the check where he could see it and returned to the signature, tasting it. "Regina Quinton," I said. "Does that ring bells enough to spend on a new car?" Wolfe had moved exactly enough to let one eyebrow confess curiosity. "Take the folder, middle drawer right, Q section." I did, and in it found a tidy clipping with a photograph that had sued the paper for its ink. It was this morning's obituary from the Times. The headline did the heavy lifting. "Regina Quinton, society figure and patron of the Hesperia, dead at 68. I remembered it now. I'd read it while my coffee was still convincing itself to be coffee. Widow of Marcus Quinton, steel shipping and iron wills. Board chair of the Hesperia Club. Old guard New York with carpets you apologize to. Known, the obit said, for exquisite dinners, sharp conversation, a charitable hand that did not tremble, and what the writer called a reigning presence, which is how you say queenly when you have an editor." "Dead," I said. "As of yesterday, according to the ink. Yet she invites you to witness an arrangement tonight. The Silver Queen checks out." "Pui," Wolfe said without rancor. He took the bank check up, balanced it between two fingers, and then set it down as if it had tried to make a rude suggestion. "What is the date?" "Today," I said. "Therefore the check was prepared this morning by someone with access to her accounts. Miss Quinton cannot have signed it unless the Times is in error, and so are her physicians and lawyers, which is possible but not probable." He reached out for the invitation card. His thumb paused an inch above it. He has a long memory for paper. "Goodwin, the stock." I passed it over. He didn't touch it yet. "Cranes," he murmured, "and the impression is not from a plate I recognize. The charm is vulgar. It's a chess queen, which demonstrates that some vices can be forgiven if they are silver," he said. He let himself touch the edge and tested the raised letters. "No plate, a digital forgery of elegance." "The key?" I showed him the key and the tassel. He glanced and was done with it. "You will ring Mr. Cohen," he said. "Ascertain whether the Gazette intends a second obit, a correction, or perhaps a resurrection. Also the address, and whether Miss Quinton's house is active. Do not mention our invitation." I went to my desk and called Lon Cohen at the Gazette. Lon has a professional relationship with the phone that begins with sarcasm and ends with information. I told him I needed the dirt under a fingernail. Any discrepancies regarding Regina Quinton's demise. "The Queen of 70, he said. "Not the chessboard, the block. We've had 3 follow-ups queued. Will, philanthropic endowments, and the Hesperia's immediate meltdown over whether to serve Pommes Anna at the memorial service. Let me check." The keys clattered. "No correction, no scandal. She died 2 evenings ago at home. Heart, private physician, whispers of a stress-related event, no police, no mess." "Why?" "I'm considering a new hobby," I said. "Ask me next week." I hung up and told Wolfe the lack of resurrection arrangements. He had the card now, held lightly as a sommelier holds a glass that costs rent money. "She is dead," he said. "Nevertheless, an invitation is extended in her style, if not by her hand, and accompanied by an inducement that suggests urgency. Also, the messenger wants an answer." "He brought his waiting chair," I said. "If you're going to ask me to decline on your behalf, I'd like to remind you I'm sensitive to the feelings of bank checks." Wolfe breathed. His chest rises slowly, as if the air asks for permission. "We do not go," he said. I nodded. I had expected that. Wolfe's feet move for emergencies, and even then only in the direction of the dining room when Fritz calls a sauce by its French name. "But," he added, and it changed the room's temperature by a degree, "we do not dismiss. The form is insolent, the substance is intriguing, and the money is money. You will return the bearer to his employer with a proposal." "Which is?" "Miss Quinton's house is welcome to invite my mind, but not my body." The invitation must be recast to fit that premise. Any arrangements to be witnessed will be witnessed here. Any records to be preserved will be preserved here. And any person involved will attend here, at my convenience, with a presentable explanation for the presumption of summoning me from my chair like a footman. That's a polite way to say, if they want you, they come with hats in hand, I said. What if the Queen's Court prefers its own carpets? Then they are playing a game not worth our time, he said. Return the 25,000. Reluctantly, I said. Obviously. I went and gave the messenger our revised commandments. He listened with the patience of a man raised to wait for elevators and verdicts. I can't change the message, he said. I can only take the answer. Then take this version and see if someone can rewrite your script, I told him. A verbal. Mr. Wolfe will receive any person connected with Miss Quinton's request today at 4 o'clock. If they want the key back, they can bring a locksmith. The check is retained on deposit pending satisfaction. Don't try to explain the word pending to them. If they don't know it, they're not who we want. He looked at me like he had questions, but none he was paid to ask. He left without the chair. I went back in. Wolfe had not moved. He never moves. He displaces. You were gentle, he observed. I was, I said, like a surgeon on a melon. He let the corner of his mouth tilt, which is what passes for hilarity on West 35th Street when the orchids are sleeping. Fritz, he called, not loudly. It carries. Fritz's head appeared, his whisk reconciled to a new day. We expect callers at 4, Wolfe said. You may wish to guard the pantry. Always, Fritz said with feeling, and vanished. I filed the invitation and the key with enough care to satisfy a curator. On impulse, I sniffed the card. It had a faint odor. Not perfume. Too clean. Paper and cardamom. I don't make a habit of sniffing stationery unless it's subpoenaed, but it wasn't my nose. It was something else. Smell that, I said, handing it back to Wolfe. He did, and frowned a centimeter. Foreign, he said. Not perfume. Kitchen. Why? Because if it came from a house in mourning, somebody's been cooking with spices you only use when you mean it, I said. Cardamom shows up when you want the room to know you're in charge, or when you want your invitation to leave a trace. Wolfe's eyes traveled to the safe behind his desk as if the safe might volunteer to explain human nature. Goodwin, the Hesperia Club. Right, the obit's favorite word, I said, and picked up the phone again. I got the club's main line. The woman who answered had the voice of a velvet rope. Is there a memorial plan for Mrs. Quinton? I asked, not using the word queen. Velvet hesitated, then arranged itself. The club will be hosting a reception for invited guests on Saturday at 3. Private. Of course. I thanked her as if she'd offered me truffles on credit. We knew what we needed. The court was convening and the courtiers were sensitive. I sat and for the next hour cleared a small tangle of bills and an inquisition from a past client who thought a retainer entitled him to my autograph on a lie. At 11, beer arrived as if summoned by mathematics. Fritz delivers it in a glass that thinks it has a destiny, and Wolfe receives it the way a righteous man receives absolution. He drank, sighed, and set it down with an approval that would have cheered the barley. I've seen that name before, Wolfe said, casual as a caress. Quinton. In our files, I asked. In a footnote to a lawsuit, he said. Marcus Quinton subscribed funds to a venture that did not transpire as promised. The suit was quieted. The attorney of record was, He closed his eyes. It is a trick of his to look like a man asleep while his brain picks locks. Bastable. You don't forget a name like that, I said. Milo Bastable. Corporate law. Cutlery smile. Call Mr. Parker, Wolfe said, meaning Nathaniel Parker, the typewriter with a license who handles our law when the city insists. Ask him for Bastable's current office and disposition. If he is not dead, he will do. I did that, and by noon I had Bastable at the end of a wire. He was still honeyed poison after all these years. Yes, he had represented Quinton interests more than once. Yes, he was acting as counsel to the estate. No, he had nothing to say about a private invitation invented by a reporter with an overripe imagination. "If you are seeking comment for the Gazette," he purred, "I recommend you find a duller topic." "I'm not seeking comment," I told him. "I'm seeking chairs. Mr. Wolfe has offered one at 4. There was a hiccup, half a second where the honey broke. "Has he?" Bastable said. "Then I suppose I will grace him, since the late Mrs. Quinton retained an affection for eccentricities when they paid dividends. 4. Good afternoon." He hung up as if he'd closed a will on my fingers. I relayed that to Wolfe. He nodded once. "1," he said. "There will be at least 2 more. He got them. At 2:30, a call came from the Hesperia Club, delicately rephrasing the velvet rope into syllables. A Ms. Tamsin Hale, the club's managing director, wished to attend with information pertinent to Mrs. Quinton's final days. She would present herself at 4. I said I would lay a rug so her feet wouldn't have to touch our floor. At 3, a different frequency, a male voice, younger, trying to be angry without getting caught at it. He was Felix March, he said, and if Mr. Wolfe intended to meddle in his godmother's private decisions, he, Felix, would be there to see the meddling and to stop it if necessary. I told him to bring a sandwich if he expected to outstare Nero Wolfe. Wolfe took all this in as if I were reading him a serialized novel and he hadn't decided whether to renew. He asked no questions about Felix. He asked one about Miss Hale, her age, which I had to guess from her vowels, and he did not comment on Bastable. If he had reasons for breaking the habits of a lifetime and inviting a small parade into the brownstone, he put them in the same pocket where he keeps Montenegro and the recipes he stole from princes. At 3:50, the orchids were returned to their loft. The office was dusted with the caution due to sacred spaces and expensive dust, and Fritz, in a helpful mood, positioned the walnut tray for coffee and brandy like a general placing artillery. I checked the door. The chain moved smoothly. I can be gracious on short notice. Before the first knock, Wolfe spoke. "Your eyes," he said, "will be busy. They usually are. You will observe what moves and what does not. Tension often attends an invitation that cannot be rescinded. Such as one signed by a woman who's 2 days dead," I said. "Just so," he said, and closed his eyes, which means he's awake. "We will discover who signed in her stead and why they thought a queen could compel a king." The bell rang. It wasn't the polite tap from the messenger this time. It was a statement. I went to let the court in. The bell's echo was still in the air when I opened the door to meet the first arrival, Milo Bastable, punctual as a tax collector and twice as pleasant. He looked as though someone had carved him out of a dark walnut desk and forgotten to sand the edges. The man wore his suit the way a priest wears his vows, tight, creased, and humorless. He had a face that could quote contracts and eyes that audited your soul. "Good afternoon, Mr. Goodwin." His tone implied that afternoon itself had done something improper. "Mr. Wolfe is expecting me." I nodded, stepping aside. "You're first, which puts you in line for the best chair and the worst coffee. Follow me." He entered, carrying the air of a boardroom into our hall. The scent of Fritz's saffron sauce tried to meet him halfway, then retreated in disgust. In the office, Wolfe was already stationed behind his desk, a mountain of composure with a glass of beer poised in front of him. Bastable inclined his head just enough to acknowledge altitude. "Mr. Bastable," Wolfe said, his voice calm and cool enough to settle an argument in a sauna. "You appear as predicted." "I seldom disappoint," Bastable replied, seating himself without being invited. "A small crime in this house. You said 4 o'clock. I prefer precision." "Commendable," Wolfe murmured. "You are acting on behalf of the late Mrs. Quinton's estate." "Indeed. And I will say at once, I find your receipt of that letter highly irregular. Mrs. Quinton is regrettably beyond correspondence. Yet she corresponds, Wolfe said, through an emissary bearing a key, a check, and a command. Bastable frowned, but not with surprise. His brows only twitched enough to reveal knowledge tucked away behind legal formality. Then you've been made part of a misunderstanding, Mr. Wolfe. Mrs. Quinton's affairs are being handled strictly through proper channels, mine among them. I had the impression of a man trying to steer an avalanche with etiquette. I perched against my desk, listening for the tremors. The doorbell rang again. Fritz went. Footsteps followed. A woman's voice, clear, clipped, and trained to manage donors, preceded her entrance. Ms. Tamsin Hale was the kind of woman who believed posture was a resume. Tall, restrained, but with eyes that could total your social worth before you opened your mouth. She carried a slim folder and the confidence of a woman used to arranging grief into tidy events. "Mr. Wolfe," she said smoothly, "thank you for seeing me on such short notice. I understand you received something unusual." "I received many unusual things," Wolfe replied, gesturing toward the red leather chair opposite his desk. "Some edible, some not. Please sit." She smiled faintly at that, a diplomatic reaction to humor she didn't quite believe in. She took the seat next to Bastable, who gave her a curt nod as though they'd already exchanged too many professional pleasantries elsewhere. Before she could open her folder, another arrival announced himself with the kind of knock that expects an argument. I didn't need the name. Felix March was 28 if he was a day, and radiated entitlement like it was cologne. He had the athletic polish of someone born to the right parties and wrong lessons. "Goodwin," he said by way of greeting, brushing past me as if walls yielded to him by birthright. "I'm here because this whole thing stinks. My godmother's dead 2 days, and suddenly strangers are handling her keys." "Then it's your lucky day," I told him. "We specialize in stenches." He bristled, but I waved him toward the final chair. Wolfe didn't lift a finger. The sight of 3 guests, each from a different corner of the Queen's life, would have unsettled anyone who hadn't built a career out of orchestrating human collisions. Wolfe only shifted 1 inch in his seat and folded his hands. "Now," he said, "we may begin." The sentence hung there like a gavel. "Miss or Ms. Hale, you were about to speak." She adjusted her folder, flipping it open with careful grace. 2 nights ago, Mrs. Quinton passed peacefully at her residence. Yesterday morning, her attorney informed me that her final correspondence was being sorted for delivery. There were 4 sealed envelopes. 1 addressed to you, Mr. Wolfe. We assumed they contained personal notes of closure. This morning, we discovered the envelope missing. Bastable stiffened. "Missing? From where?" "From her study," Hale said. "It was kept in the top drawer of her escritoire. The staff swears it was there last night when the inventory began. This morning, gone." Wolfe's fingers steepled. "And yet it found its way to me, via messenger." She nodded grimly. "Exactly. Which means someone in her household took it, or had access." Felix leaned forward, impatience written across his well-bred features. "Then question the staff. Why drag my godmother's lawyer and the club into this circus?" Wolfe turned his eyes to him with the kind of calm that melts pride faster than fire. "Because, Mr. March, an invitation to me is not an accident. It is a strategy. The question is whose." That stopped him for half a second. I said, "There's another point. The envelope wasn't just paper. It came with a key to her home on East 70th. And a check for $25,000, dated today." That did it. Bastable's mouth pinched, Hale gasped, and Felix's composure cracked into honest confusion. "Dated today," Hale repeated. "Impossible. Her accounts are sealed." "Apparently not sealed enough," I said. "Whoever's writing checks in her name has a lively sense of timing." Wolfe nodded slightly, a gesture of satisfaction when the pieces start to make faint music. So, we have an invitation issued posthumously, bearing the Queen's emblem tied to her money and her key. It names me as witness, which implies an event not yet concluded. Therefore, something of hers remains unsettled, and someone wishes it to appear official." Bastable's voice was cool again. "Mr. Wolfe, if this is a fraud, you should turn the matter over to the police." "Perhaps," Wolfe said. "But fraud alone would not bear the scent of cardamom." Hale blinked. "Cardamom?" "On the stationery," I explained. "Smelled like someone had been cooking secrets." Felix snorted. "That's ridiculous." "Most crimes are," Wolfe said dryly, "and yet they persist." He leaned back, letting silence thicken. I could see it, the invisible geometry forming behind his gaze, the lines between motives, money, and mortality. Then he spoke, almost lazily. "Mr. Goodwin, tomorrow morning you will visit Mrs. Quinton's house. Begin with the study, determine who had access to her private desk and what they intended me to witness at 8 o'clock this evening." Felix stood. "If you're suggesting I'll let you snoop around my godmother's house—" "I suggest nothing," Wolfe said softly. "I state, you may attend if you can do so without impeding Mr. Goodwin's work. Otherwise, I will proceed regardless. I'm already in possession of the key." Felix's glare flicked between us, but he said nothing more. As I saw them out, Bastable brisk, Hale tight-lipped, Felix stormy, I caught Wolfe's reflection in the hall mirror. Still as marble, but his eyes alive with something rare and calculating. When the door closed, he said, "Goodwin, this evening we will not go to East 70th Street, but someone else will, and we will watch what they do." It wasn't a question. It was strategy beginning to bloom. By the time the front door had latched behind our trio of visitors, the room had returned to its usual density of silence, the kind that settles after a storm, not before one. Wolfe remained where he'd been all along, his eyes half closed, his mind somewhere 3 moves ahead of the board. I could almost hear the gears aligning in that oversized head of his, smooth and patient, never noisy. "Goodwin," he said after a minute, "you will take Saul Panza." That was an escalation. Saul wasn't for routine errands, he was for shadows that might move. "We're not waiting until morning." "Decidedly not," Wolfe said. "Our visitor specified 8 o'clock. If the location is to be active, we will have evidence of it tonight." He reached into a drawer, withdrew the silver queen charm from the envelope, and turned it in the light. "Whoever sent this wants me involved as witness, an observer with authority. They assume my presence lends credibility. Therefore, something will occur at 8 that requires legitimacy, or the appearance of it. Meaning somebody's about to stage a performance." "Precisely," he said, settling back. "And I do not attend theater. I prefer reports." "Fine," I said. "Saul and I play the audience. Curtain at 8. He inclined his head. "You will observe. Nothing more. No heroics. No interventions. Note what is moved, who enters, and what is removed. The scent of cardamom is an affectation, not an accident. It marks whoever orchestrated this farce. Follow the odor of vanity." At 6:30, I was in Saul's Plymouth, heading uptown, the key in my pocket, and the evening settling into that autumn hush that makes the city look like it's thinking. Saul drove like he always does. Steady, eyes 2 blocks ahead, hands that never fidget. He listened while I outlined the setup. The dead patroness, the posthumous invitation, the lawyer with a polished conscience, the club manager with a file, and the heir with a temper. Saul nodded once. "Neat triangle," he said. "But you think there's a 4th corner?" "I think," I said, "we've been dealt a card from someone who wants us to play along." East 70th was a street that wore its money with breeding, quiet facades, guarded lights, and doors that expect chauffeurs, not visitors. Regina Quinton's townhouse stood mid-block, 3 stories of respectable arrogance, with shutters too clean to have seen grief. We parked half a block away, a tidy distance for plausible deniability. The house was dark except for one upstairs window, faintly lit. No police, no mourners, no movement. It should have been a mausoleum with better plumbing. Saul adjusted his cap and checked his wristwatch. "Half an hour till 8. I nodded. We wait. At 7:52, a black sedan rolled up and idled in front of the house. 2 figures got out, one unmistakably Bastable, the other Felix March. They exchanged clipped words at the curb, too far for me to hear, but their body language had the flavor of controlled anger. Felix gestured toward the door. Bastable shook his head. Eventually, the lawyer produced a key and opened up. The 2 disappeared inside. Saul made a small grunt. Not grieving much. They're either working or fighting. Maybe both, I said. We'll give them a minute. At 8:05, another car, a dark blue coupe, slid into a space further up. Tamsin Hale merged, elegant even under the street lamp, clutching her folder like it was armor. She paused before the townhouse door, squared her shoulders, and went in. "That's 3, Saul murmured. "Yeah," I said, "and the playbill said 4. The 4th came at 8:12 on foot. The same messenger who delivered the letter that morning, still carrying his careful posture, and now a small satchel. He rang once and was admitted without hesitation. Saul jotted the times on his pad, all accounted for. We waited. The minutes crawled. At 8:30, faint light flickered through the front parlor curtains. Movement, shadows crossing, pausing, one of them gesturing toward the window. I couldn't make out voices, but the rhythm was sharp. Accusation, rebuttal, command. Then abruptly, darkness again. 10 more minutes. Nothing. Then the messenger reappeared, leaving quickly, his satchel heavier than before. He turned east, vanishing into the street's dim stretch. Saul looked at me. "You want him?" "Follow, but no fireworks," I said. "I'll check the house." He slipped from the car, moving like fog. I waited until the street was clear, then crossed to the townhouse. The front door wasn't latched. That alone was enough to give me gooseflesh. I pushed it open and stepped in. Inside smelled faintly of polish, lilies, and something sharper. Spice lingering in the air like memory. The entry hall glowed from a single lamp, left burning. The silence was dense, unnatural. I called out once, low. No answer. In the parlor, the furniture was immaculate, nothing disturbed, except for the faint scent of cardamom, stronger near the mantel. On it sat a crystal decanter and 3 glasses, one still half full. Beside it, a folded sheet of paper weighted by a silver queen charm identical to the first. I didn't touch it. Wolfe would have scolded me from 50 blocks away if I had. Instead, I glanced toward the adjoining corridor and froze. A narrow trail of dark drops led across the marble, barely visible but unmistakable. Blood. I followed it slowly. It wound toward the study, the one mentioned in Mrs. Quinton's obituary as her favorite room. The door was ajar. I nudged it open with my foot and saw Bastable slumped over the escritoire, his hand still clutching the handle of a letter opener driven clean into his chest. The papers on the desk were ruffled, as if something had been searched or removed. For a second, the silence felt alive. Then I heard it, a soft creak from somewhere deeper in the house, followed by a door closing. Whoever had done the staging hadn't gone far. I backed away, quiet as I could, and stepped into the hall. Every instinct said leave, but Wolfe's voice lived in my head like a permanent tenant. Observe. Not interfere. Still, corpses changed the rules. I took one last look at the study, then turned and slipped out into the night. Saul was waiting in the car when I reached it. Messenger dumped the satchel in a mailbox at Lexington and kept walking, he said. Didn't look back. There's a dead man inside, I told him. He didn't blink. Who? Milo Bastable. And if this was part of the Queen's last invitation, someone just changed the script. We drove back in silence. Wolfe was waiting, as if the room had been holding its breath for us. He saw my face before I spoke. Well, I handed him the silver queen charm I'd taken from the mantel. She invited you to witness an arrangement, I said. You got one. Bastable's dead. Wolfe took the charm, weighed it, and said softly, Then the game has begun. Wolfe didn't speak for a long minute after I delivered the news. The charm lay in his palm, gleaming faintly under the office lamp, a tiny crown catching the light like mockery. He studied it the way a man studies a puzzle that insults his intelligence. Fritz had frozen halfway between the dining room and the kitchen, his hand still gripping a tray that hadn't earned its keep yet. You could tell the word dead hadn't reached his comfort threshold. Wolfe finally placed the charm beside the check on his blotter, creating a neat tableau of motive and consequence. Describe, he said quietly. I did, everything from the timing of the arrivals, to the way the light flickered in the parlor, to Bastable's sudden transformation from counselor to corpse. When I got to the blood trail and the missing paper on the desk, Wolfe's fingers began their slow temple-pressing routine. Index and middle pressed against the forehead, thumbs below the chin, the universal sign for somebody has offended logic. You did not touch the body. Not so much as a fingerprint. I've learned that particular hymn. Excellent. And Saul? He followed the messenger. The man ditched the satchel in a mailbox and kept walking. No tail after that. I'd bet my week's pay there's something in that bag tied to the whole performance. Wolfe exhaled through his nose, a sound like a cello string in minor key. Something intended to appear later as revelation. An arrangement indeed. He closed his eyes briefly. The man is dead, which invites the police, and yet we cannot summon them without also inviting the very interference our opponent desires. You mean they want you in the spotlight? Undeniably. To discredit me, distract me, or draw me? I decline to be drawn. He reached for the phone and dialed with deliberate precision. When Lon Cohen's nasal tone came through, Wolfe's voice dropped an octave. Mr. Cohen, there will shortly be an incident of interest to your colleagues in the press. At the residence of the late Mrs. Regina Quinton. I advise you to ensure that the first report is accurate. Attorney Milo Bastable, found deceased, cause yet to be confirmed. Do not speculate regarding Nero Wolfe or his associates. You will later be furnished with facts that will make accuracy profitable. He hung up before Lon could start his questions. Then to me. The less surprise the police find there, the better. You will call Inspector Kramer, offer him the location, nothing more. I did. Kramer's voice arrived through the line like gravel soaked in coffee. Don't tell me you were there. I was nearby, I said. It's not a habit, Kramer. You'll want to get to East 70th before some rookie smudges the evidence. Bastable's not going anywhere. His groan was audible. If Wolfe's involved, I'll bring aspirin. You stay put till I call. I'd say it's mutual, I told him and hung up. Wolfe had already turned his chair half an inch toward the window, an act of physical daring for him. The problem, he said, is that death simplifies nothing. Bastable's elimination serves a purpose, which we must deduce before the police muddle it. Somebody wanted to silence him. Or impersonate him, Wolfe said. You mentioned missing papers. They may have contained what Mrs. Quinton intended me to witness. Now they will appear elsewhere, perhaps as evidence, perhaps as a snare. He poured himself a small measure of brandy, a ritual that meant he'd begun building a staircase of logic. The messenger, the satchel, the key, each device is ceremonial, almost theatrical. The scent of cardamom was not for pleasure. It was a signature, Someone wants recognition. I leaned back, watching the slow swirl of thought settle across his face. You think Bastable wasn't the target? He was a target, Wolfe said. Not the one. He was expendable. He had information or a function that expired once he had played his part. You will go to the post office at dawn. Retrieve that satchel discreetly. The police will not yet have traced it. If the contents are ordinary, we learn nothing. If extraordinary, we may yet learn everything. Fritz reappeared at the doorway, uncertain whether the evening's atmosphere allowed for sustenance. Wolfe gestured faintly. Coffee, Fritz. Strong. Mr. Goodwin will require clarity before dawn. The tray appeared within minutes. The scent of roasted beans tried to wrestle the room's tension and lost. I took my cup and sipped, half watching Wolfe as he reopened the letter from that morning. Regina Quinton invited me to witness an arrangement, he murmured again. A lawyer dies during an apparent gathering of her confidants. Tell me, Archie, what does an arrangement require? I gave it a thought. 2 parties, a condition, and someone to see it through. He nodded slowly. Precisely. She meant for me to serve as arbiter. That suggests she foresaw contention, perhaps over property or guilt or truth. But the invitation was intercepted and altered. Whoever altered it knew enough to make the forgery credible, yet careless enough to betray themselves through that scent. Could be the cook, the club director, or the heir. They all had a reason to know her habits. Yes, Wolfe said. But only one has the audacity to counterfeit her authority and the means to execute such timing. You're leaning toward Hale. She is organized, intelligent, and would understand the ceremonial allure of the gesture, he said. But I reserve judgment. Vanity manifests in men as often as women, and Felix March is made of pride and impetuous blood. He might stage drama to force inheritance or justification. He drained his cup, an act nearly theatrical in itself. Tomorrow you will pay your respects to the Hesperia Club. The late Mrs. Quinton's sanctuary will now host whispers. Speak to Miss Hale again. Gauge whether grief has improved her candor, and if Kramer calls before that, tell him I am indisposed but intrigued. Which is your polite way of saying you'll solve it before he files the paperwork. Wolfe didn't answer. He lifted the silver queen charm once more, held it to the lamplight, and said softly, They thought to play a game of queens. They will learn the difference between adornment and power. He set it down with care, as though placing a final piece on a board no one else could see. Outside, the city exhaled, distant and restless. Inside, the brownstone seemed to listen. The investigation had moved from invitation to execution, and somewhere, between the scent of cardamom and the rustle of missing pages, the Queen's last move was waiting. At dawn, the city was still half asleep, which suited me fine. I had no taste for headlines before breakfast, especially the kind with our names in them. Wolfe had stayed in his chair until 2, thinking in the quiet way he does. Breathing slow, eyes half shut, as though deduction were digestion. By the time I hit the street, he was upstairs among the orchids, leaving me to deal with the practical world and its post offices. Saul met me on Madison, wearing the same jacket as last night, which for Saul meant it had survived another operation and deserved a medal. They don't open the bins till 7, he said. But I've got a friend at the branch who owes me for a poker game he lost twice. We made our way to the small post office near Lexington where the messenger had dropped his mysterious satchel. Saul's friend, a sleepy clerk with a conscience as flexible as his ours, led us into the sorting area under the pretense of lost property verification. It took 10 minutes of rummaging through canvas bags and bureaucratic dust before we found it. A small leather satchel, unremarkable except for a faint trace of spice when I lifted it. Cardamom, I said. Saul grunted. You've got a nose for pastries. Not lately. Let's take this one to the boss before Kramer finds out the mail's been giving evidence. By the time we reached the brownstone, Wolfe was already at breakfast, a mountain of satisfaction behind his eggs. Fritz hovered near the sideboard, watching us with the expression of a man expecting bad news about good food. I put the satchel on the desk. Wolfe's eyes flicked to it, then to me. "You were discreet?" he asked. "As usual," I said. "No cameras, no confessions." He gestured. "Open it." Inside were 3 items: a sheaf of papers, a small wooden box with a brass clasp, and a folded linen napkin, oddly perfumed. I spread the papers on the desk. They were legal documents, draft pages, typed, some with Bastable's signature half finished. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. "A codicil," he murmured. "Addendum to the will." I read the heading. "Looks like it changes something substantial. The main estate transfer, half redirected to a new trust. Beneficiary listed as the Hesperia Foundation, restricted project." "Restricted," Wolfe repeated. "Meaning secret." He tapped the page with one thick finger. "And the authorization lines are unsigned. The document was in preparation but not executed. Bastable may have died before it could be finalized. Or because of it." Saul reached for the wooden box and opened it carefully. Inside were 3 chess pieces, 2 pawns and a queen, all silver, identical to the charm from the letter. Each pawn was engraved on its base with initials MB, TH, and FM. The queen's base was blank. "Well," I said, "we've got ourselves a souvenir set. Lawyer, club manager, heir, all accounted for, and one royal without a name." Wolfe's expression didn't change, but his voice dropped into that lower register that usually precedes revelation. "The Queen is Regina Quinton, but the absence of her initials implies that she is not part of this game. She is the board." Saul frowned. "Meaning?" "Someone constructed this," Wolfe said, "as both a clue and a taunt. The scent, the symbolism, the ceremony, it is vanity expressed through logic. Whoever did this wishes to be admired even as they deceive. We are dealing with an intellect that enjoys staging rather than killing." "Tell that to Bastable," I said. "His death was a prop," Wolfe replied coldly, "intended to validate the illusion of chaos while concealing order. The missing pages in the study were likely the signed copy of this codicil. Whoever holds it now controls the leverage of Mrs. Quinton's fortune." Saul leaned against the desk. "So who benefits from hiding it?" "Possibly all of them, but not equally," Wolfe said. "Miss Hale stands to gain reputation and authority if she reveals a philanthropic project the club can control. Felix March gains protection from inheritance taxes if the trust shields assets. But only one would orchestrate murder to ensure dominance." "Felix," I guessed. "He's impulsive enough." Wolfe shook his head. "Too impulsive for such orchestration. Miss Hale, on the other hand, understands organization, ritual, and public perception. The invitation, the chess motif, all speak of control disguised as propriety. Still, one must not accuse until one compels admission." He reached for the napkin and unfolded it. Inside was a handwritten note in violet ink, elegant but hurried. "For the witness. The Queen is not dead, merely displaced. Her house remains her stage, and her final act awaits revelation." Wolfe's lips tightened. "Pretension and riddles. It confirms our hypothesis. Someone intends to continue the game." He looked at me. "Goodwin, the Hesperia Club will open its doors this afternoon to staff arranging for Mrs. Quinton's memorial. You will attend, take the papers, return the charm to Miss Hale, and observe how she responds to its resurrection. Mention that the codicil has reappeared, but omit details. If she knows its contents, she will betray herself." Saul straightened. "And me?" "You will locate the messenger," Wolfe said. "He is no errand boy. A man chosen for discretion and neutrality, likely hired through intermediaries. Find his connection to the Hesperia or to Miss Hale's staff. Bring me a name before nightfall." Saul nodded once and left without questions. That's why Saul remains Wolfe's first pick for anything delicate. No wasted words, no visible ego. Wolfe rose, a movement so rare it made Fritz look up sharply. He crossed to the window, gazing at the street as if the asphalt were a chessboard, and fate had just moved a knight. "This game is layered, Archie," he said softly. "Not murder alone, but message." Mrs. Quinton foresaw betrayal and sought a witness immune to corruption. The impostor merely followed her pattern. I pocketed the codicil draft. "Then we're still playing by her rules." "For now," he said. "But the Queen's last invitation has become my summons. Whoever believes themselves conductor will soon learn who writes the final movement." He turned back toward his desk, the morning sun sliding across the silver queen charm like a spotlight. Wolfe's eyes followed it, and for the first time since the letter arrived, he smiled, a small, dangerous curve of satisfaction that told me the real contest had just begun. By 1 that afternoon, I was walking into the Hesperia Club with a folder under my arm and a face that said, "Mourning, but moderately curious." The club was what you'd get if mahogany had an ego. Dark panels, plush carpet, and the sort of hush that comes from generations of people afraid of spilling on antique rugs. The lobby had been rearranged for the memorial. White lilies, a portrait of Mrs. Regina Quinton smiling as if money were a moral virtue, and a table for condolence books. Tamsin Hale stood near the far end, orchestrating every flower with the quiet authority of a woman who never needed to raise her voice. She was dressed in black that wasn't mourning so much as command. When she saw me, her expression stayed composed, but her eyes narrowed a fraction, half welcome, half warning. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "you've come on behalf of Mr. Wolfe, I presume." "Correct. He sends his regrets, and a few questions in his stead." "Of course," she said, her tone balancing civility with exhaustion. "This morning has been chaos. The police have been calling, reporters sniffing. Milo's death, well, it has cast a shadow." "That tends to happen when lawyers end up with new ventilation," I said. She flinched, but only slightly. I offered her the folder. Something turned up in the mail. Draft of a codicil, unsigned. "Thought you might want to see if it matches your files." She hesitated before taking it. Her fingers brushed the paper like it might sting. "Where did you find this?" "Let's just say it wandered into the wrong bag at the wrong time. Lucky for you, we're tidy people." Her eyes flicked across the first page, scanning with the efficiency of someone who's had to read legalese for breakfast. Her breath caught at the line referencing the restricted project. She closed the folder quickly, as though it had confessed too much. "I see," she said. "Then you already know." "I know it redirects a fair slice of Mrs. Quinton's fortune to something the board doesn't advertise. Care to fill in the blanks?" "It's confidential," she said automatically, but her tone was too fast, too polished. "A fund Mrs. Quinton was establishing for certain. Private initiatives. Cultural, not financial." "Private's one word. Hidden's another. Depends who's holding the wallet." Her composure cracked, just enough to show the woman under the marble. "You think I killed Milo?" she asked quietly. "I think somebody used him," I said. "And whoever did wanted it to look like an argument gone bad over this." I tapped the folder. "But here's what doesn't fit. The messenger. The silver charms. The check in Wolfe's name. That's not murder for profit. It's theater. Somebody's writing a script." She drew in a breath, glanced around the lobby to make sure we weren't being watched, and lowered her voice. "You're not wrong, but you don't understand. Mrs. Quinton, she was preparing to expose something before she died. A misuse of club funds. She told me she had evidence, but then she—" Hale stopped, shook her head. "She said she'd send for a witness. I didn't know she meant him." "Wolfe's reputation travels," I said. "Usually faster than I do." "I thought she was being paranoid," Hale continued. "But when I heard she died and that letter went missing, I realized someone else knew what she planned, someone inside the club. That narrowed the field. You have names? One, she said reluctantly. Felix March. His godmother was going to cut his inheritance entirely if he didn't withdraw funds he'd borrowed through her charitable accounts. He'd been desperate, angry, and Bastable knew. He was mediating between them. So March finds out about the codicil, realizes it ends his free ride, and decides to make sure it never gets signed. Perhaps, she said. But Milo wouldn't have met him alone. If they were together at the house, it's because someone convinced them to be. Someone who had both their trust. Like you? I asked. Her eyes flashed, but she didn't rise to the bait. Like whoever sent that invitation. She was either a good actress or telling the truth with a few edits. Either way, the air around her carried the same faint trace of spice I'd caught from the stationery. I filed that away and nodded. If Felix shows up here, call me. I want to look at his expression when he learns Wolfe has the codicil. She gave me a small nod and turned back to her lilies. I left her to it, stopping by the club's reception desk to leave my card. As I stepped outside, my phone buzzed. Saul's voice came through, clipped but steady. Got him. The messenger's name's Eric Blaine. Works freelance as a courier for legal offices. Small firm, downtown. Did a few one-offs for Bastable, but yesterday he got a call from someone at the Hesperia asking for a special delivery. Voice was female. Formal tone. He thought it was Hale. Thought. He's not sure. Said she pronounced Quinton like someone who'd said it 100 times, and she paid double for discretion. That was enough to make the hairs on my neck consider a meeting. Good work. Keep him close, but don't spook him. Wolfe will want to chat. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting with Kramer, who looked as happy as a man sitting on a tack. He'd clearly been holding the fort since his call that morning, and his patience had expired. Bastable's death was murder, Kramer said without preamble. Single wound, left chest, no sign of struggle, no prints but his and a smudge we can't place. The coroner puts it around 8:15. You were nearby, Goodwin, which is one of those coincidences that gives me ulcers. I was doing my job, I said, and if you'd been half an hour earlier, you'd have seen the curtain go up. Kramer grunted. And what's Wolfe's angle this time? Wolfe set down his beer with an audible click. My angle, Inspector, is to restore sequence where others see coincidence. The man was killed, not for what he knew, but for what he was about to confirm. The document you'll soon find missing from his office will verify that. Kramer's jaw tightened. You're sitting on evidence again. Evidence requires context, Wolfe said, and you rarely wait long enough for either. Indulge me a day, and I'll spare you a week's paperwork. Kramer's eyes flicked to me, then back to Wolfe. You've got 24 hours, he said finally. But if I find out you're hiding another body, or another queen, I'll bring a warrant big enough to cover this whole brownstone. When the door shut behind him, Wolfe exhaled through his nose, a sound that could have curdled milk. Goodwin, he said, we are nearly at the crux. Tonight the game turns. Meaning? Meaning, he said. The queen has not yet played her last move. And I had the feeling he wasn't just talking about Mrs. Quinton. Now generate the final section of the story, ensuring a satisfying resolution. Maintain the logical progression of clues and character arcs, delivering the final reveal smoothly while keeping the ending impactful and true to the detective style.